As we get underway with this week's episode of the OHL podcast, allow me for a moment to shamelessly self-promote. Yes, I'm wearing the Farwell for Hire t-shirt. It is the month of May. That is Cystic Fibrosis Awareness Month. And that is a cause, cystic fibrosis, that is very near and dear to my heart. So I do a fundraising campaign throughout the month of May each and every year to raise some money for research into finding a cure for cystic fibrosis. And you get the chance to participate because we're running a 50-50 draw. So, sorry, Ontario residents only, our friends from the Philippines and from Singapore and Finland and anywhere else around the world, thank you. Our American friends, of course, as well. But Ontario residents can play along, or you can ask a friend in Ontario to buy a ticket for you. Just go to cf5050.ca, cf5050.ca. Buy yourself a ticket. Packages start at just $10. Last year's winner got more than 50 grand. Nobody's going to complain about that. Shameless self-promotion out of the way. Dansky, welcome to Cystic Fibrosis Awareness Month.
Yeah, I know it's early days, but you're going to be tired by the end of this month. So what a great cause. And yeah, I have to absolutely promote that. It's a great cause. So get your 50-50 tickets and anything else you can do to support CF fundraising this month.
I will be a little tired because the for hire part means I actually do go out and do odd jobs in exchange for a donation to cystic fibrosis, which basically makes May the only month of the year that I do any real work. Like, let's just be honest, okay? My job is sitting around and talking or going to hockey arenas and talking, not the toughest gig anybody ever signed up for. So it's good that I remind myself that people do real work and real jobs. For me, it's at least 1 month of the year. Hey, how about our respective NHL teams? Just before we dive into the OHL podcast, Dan Mahar, you want to talk about this a little bit, huh? How's it going over there on your side as my team heads to the second round? Go Leafs, go.
Hey, I heard the term many times this year with the Habs. There was house money to make the playoffs. And let me just remind you that they were predicted by just about every single pundit to be bottom five this year. So, I mean, I gotta say, it may sound like coping, sure, but as a Hab fan, I think we're all pretty happy with making the playoffs this year and the trajectory that team's on. But yeah, this was never going to be a multi-round year, I don't think. So I think, is it a rare occasion where we're both semi-happy with the turnout so far?
I would say so. Of course, as a Leafs fan, I'm thinking, great, let's have to go through the Florida Panthers, the defending Stanley Cup champions, in round number 2. But listen, if you want to get there, you got to beat everybody anyway. So beat them now or beat them later. The point is you just got to go out there and beat them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, the Florida Panthers look daunting, but I think I've been a firm believer that just about any team making the playoffs these days can beat any other team if the cards fall right. And I mean, the Panthers are not spring chickens in a lot of ways, and they've come through some wars, so it's tough to repeat. So you never know.
I love the description of your team. Most people pick them to finish bottom 5. Who do they think they are? The Kitchener Rangers? Come on.
That feels like a direct call out of me, who predicted the Kitchen Rangers too. I think I predicted them to come 8th in the conference, so I only missed by 5 slots. Pretty close.
I remember the beginning of the season, and it was repeated a lot towards the end, that in the initial power rankings from the OHL, the Kitchener Rangers, I believe, were 16th, so not far off where you figured they would finish. And we've gone over that at some length. It was a great story, even though it came to an end at the hands of the London Knights again in a third round sweep. But the Kitchener Rangers were a pretty remarkable story this year, as were the Kingston Frontenacs. And we'll touch on that a little bit later on in this episode. But let's get down to business. That man over there is Dan Mahar. You'll find him on X at his name, Dan Mahar. I'm on X at Farwell_OHL. And you can reach out anytime. We love interacting with you and hearing your feedback via email, ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Drop a comment on either the YouTube channel or wherever you're listening to this podcast. Send us a note. Love the interaction. And the NCAA rule change and how it's changing the landscape continues to make waves through the Canadian Hockey League, really, the OHL of which is, of course, a part. But the latest from the Associated Press talks about all kinds of things, including 6-figure offers being made to players to come on over to the NCAA. The water's fine and the money is flowing.
Yeah, I think we're in that kind of pioneering stage of it, I guess, if you will, the Wild West, where a lot of people are speculating on what's going to happen here. And yeah, some of the stuff I'm seeing most recently is that some of there was always a trick in getting NIL, name, image, likeness money for Canadian players going to the NCAA. And hockey in general in the NCAA was never as high for no money as the other sports, but some of that landscape's changing too. So with that, the lure of CHL players to the NCAA might be a factor. So the most recent theories I've seen from a number of pundits that it might skew the CHL younger. We might see some players leave in their 19, 20-year-old years. Keep in mind, I don't expect the floodgates to open. I expect where you might see some denting is in those really high end players. The Gavin McKenna's. There's rumors there. Michael Misa. We just saw Henry Muse move over. So some of those high end players that can get nil money and have already spent 3 or maybe even 4 years in the CHL, the lure could be there. But I still think we have to keep in mind that the NCAA is primarily an older league. It's tough to get ice time at 18, 19 years old. So to make the leap, you'd have to be a really high end player or be fairly confident you're going to spend at least a couple years in the NCAA beyond your junior years. So I don't think the floodgates necessarily will open as much as they could, but I think we're going to see maybe some two-way traffic, Mike. We're seeing a lot more players keeping their options open. We're seeing some rookie camps starting in the OHL where some American players are showing up where they wouldn't have previously, just to get the lay of the land. And maybe you commit for a year here instead of committing for 3 or 4. So a lot is up in the air, and it's a bit of a guessing game. But I do think the trend is that we might see a couple high end players really consider the nil money in the States.
We'll come back to those American players that are testing the waters here in the Ontario Hockey League, because a lot of US born players are showing up on development camp rosters in the OHL this year. So we'll get to that in just a moment. But to your point on these high end players, Dan, and let's specifically look at Michael Misa. I didn't put a whole lot of stock in those rumblings much earlier in this OHL season when he was linked to the NCAA. But consider this, and it's not meant to be a knock against Saginaw by any stretch, don't get me wrong, but the reality of the situation for Michael Misa heading into what would be a fourth Ontario Hockey League season is with a Saginaw team that is likely ready to rebuild and would be looking to, providing, of course, he doesn't end up in the National Hockey League, but would be looking to likely trade a Michael Misa. So maybe he likes the idea of being traded, or maybe he looks at things and says, geez, it's going to be a tough year in Saginaw. I can go make some nil money in the NCAA and kind of play it out. This comes down to the options that we talked about when this story was first developing, and we were talking about the possibility of the NCAA rule change, which of course now has come to pass. We talked about the best part of it being options for players. And if you don't like the lay of the land where you're currently playing, the door is open and it's swinging the other way. That's the kind of scenario I could see a player like Misa making the leap.
Yeah, you just hit the nail on the head, Mike. It's about options. It's about these players having a little bit more leverage and more avenues than before. And if you consider all the factors that come into their decision making, with Michael Misa, you just had a really interesting example because it depends where their junior club currently is in their cycles as well. Oftentimes, when those players are hitting their 19-year-old season, the team's expected to contend. You get those cases like Saginaw with Michael Misa, where they just had 2 contending years, one big one where they won. So they're actually on the downswing. So if you've already played 4 seasons and now you're kind of coming down the cliff, you might start to consider other options. Like you said, leveraging a trade within your league is a big one, or jumping to the NCAA. And another consideration, we already talked about the nil money. Well, part of that decision making, I suppose, is based on how long you're expecting to stay in the NCAA and what they can guarantee you, because obviously that money increases the longer you're there. And if you're a Michael Misa, you might not be there more than a year or so, especially if you're going at 19 or 20. So there's all kinds of factors and considerations, but absolutely one of them is trying to leverage a trade within your own league. We're definitely going to see some of that.
Our buddy David, who's a regular and loyal listener to the podcast. Thank you, David. Shout out the Nickel City of Sudbury. But David sent an email to ohlpodcast@rogers.com and looks at the opposite side of this. So we're talking about an OHL player making the leap the other way. But David notes just in the NCAA how chaos can erupt, citing Baylor and its men's basketball team, which has zero returning players for the upcoming season. Zero through graduation, early declares for the NBA draft, portal transfers, injuries, academic ineligibility, etc. All 14 roster spots are currently vacant. So, if again you're playing for an NCAA program and the roster is seeing that kind of turnover, you might be thinking, well, my options over here with that OHL team that holds my rights looks pretty darn good right about now. So obviously it can work both ways. And in that vein too, I am wondering about this, and I'll have to plead some degree of ignorance when it comes to the NCAA, but I don't think it's anything other than obvious that football and basketball rule the NCAA roost. So even as they are developing hockey programs and building stadiums that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, it's going to be attractive. There's no question about it. But where is hockey going to rank in the NCAA landscape overall? The one thing that you can be sure of in the Ontario Hockey League and across, of course, the Canadian Hockey League is that the market that you are playing in is going to be the market where the game you're playing is the number one game in that market. And I don't know how much that might factor in to a player's decision, but again, hockey is not going to be in the top drawer in the NCAA.
No, it's an excellent point. You know, when you start to delve into the logistics of NIL money in the NCAA, it gets really complicated. And like you said, the basketball players and football players are top notch. We're talking, $4 or $5 million in nil money for some of the top players there. Hockey, it's more in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's tough to guarantee it too. So no college or no American school is going to guarantee huge nil money. It's going to be negotiated through their package. So it gets pretty complicated. Where only the really top players could actually count on getting much there. But it is changing. Hockey is elevating that ladder. So you never know. I mean, when you're looking at compared to what they get paid, quote unquote, to play in the CHL, I mean, even if you get a 50K worth of nil money guaranteed, that's a pretty enticing offer, especially on top of scholarships and whatnot. So yeah, there's a lot to be determined. We know hockey's rising the ranks, but you're absolutely right in saying that it's unlikely that a lot of CHL players are going to get a lot of NAL money as it currently stands. So there's limiting factors that we don't have to sweat too much.
I think there are two things that still tip the balance in favor of the Ontario Hockey League / Canadian Hockey League in a massive way. One is the number of players that come through the CHL and move on to professional hockey, get drafted into the National Hockey League. We're talking hundreds versus less than 100 for the NCAA. And the Associated Press article that has sparked this conversation on our podcast this week makes note of that. However, those players coming out, there were just over 70 from the NCAA to the National Hockey League. More than 60 of them, so a very high percentage, were first rounders, which now you're starting to talk about getting some pretty good money and pretty good prospects in the National Hockey League. So a high percentage of first rounders, but still overall, NCAA was seventh in terms of developing players and moving them on to the National Hockey League, whereas the Canadian Hockey League continues to lead the way in that department. The other thing, kind of away from that possibility, first rounders, etc., is I believe the schedule that the OHL / CHL offers. It's as close to a pro schedule as you're going to get. And if you're trying to develop players, I think you want to see that workload. You want to see that amount of ice time over the course of a season, because it's going to be really tough going from an NCAA schedule into an 80 plus American Hockey League or National Hockey League schedule. So I think that's still also an ace up the sleeve, if you will, of the Canadian Hockey League in all of this. However, That does not mean you can have the huge lead in terms of the number of players you graduate to the National Hockey League. You can say, yes, our schedule most closely mimics a pro schedule, etc. But the bottom line here, Dan, and we've talked about this before, so we'll just emphasize it again right here. These leagues, these teams that we watch on a regular basis in the Ontario Hockey League are going to be stepping up their game, so to speak, when it comes to making their place an attractive place for players to come. That means facilities, that means coaching and development, you name it. Basically it's an all-out recruiting war almost already.
Yeah, you absolutely can't get complacent in these days with hockey landscape, and you're absolutely right. I think, Mike, one of the other big factors, everything you just said, is completely relevant. And there's one other piece that I think will settle a lot of the landscape, and that's the new CBA coming from the NHL. They've already kind of worked out a deal. Details still to be confirmed with the USHL and Hockey USA. We know something's coming with the CHL, and I think one of the things that we're expecting to see is that the length of time you have to sign a CHL prospect will be moved to match what you had for the NCAA. So if you drafted an NCAA player, you had 4 years or until graduation to sign him. A CHL player, you only had 2 years. So teams would err on the side of taking the NCAA player. When they even that out, or at least get it closer, you now have 3 or 4 years to get the CHL player. That makes it more attractive for the CHL player to stay in the CHL because their leash is longer, their runway is longer. They could leap to the NCAA after junior for their overage year or whatnot, and then have a little more time to develop. So there's that, and then there's the other component that we always, or at least I'll speak for myself, I always looked at as a negative would be if the NHL had some allowances for 19-year-old players to play in the AHL. There is a positive side to that because if that allowance is there, then more of those players are likely to stay in the CHL or have that reciprocal agreement where maybe they play part of the year in the AHL and come back to the CHL instead of just having to go somewhere else like the NCAA in the interim. Because the NHL teams with that CBA, they have more flexibility too to say, we like this player in the CHL, the top end talent's there, it's the best development league, he's going to have a shorter path to the NHL, but we want some way to balance off what NIL money he might get in the NCAA, so they can do contractual tactics to get him where he should be. So I think the CBA is going to be a big factor as well, Mike. But yeah, there's the options opening up for these players mean that one of the downsides I could potentially see is just that loyalty and identity with a team. As players hop from NCAA team to NCAA team or to the CHL or back or you name it, is there going to be that strong identity of players, locking into a program for 4 years? And if that erodes a little bit, I don't think that's a good thing, but it is for the players to have those options.
So here's my wild stab in the dark, Dan, and I don't think it's all that wild, to be honest with you. In fact, dare I say, I'm not unconvinced this will happen in our lifetimes. I'm a little older than you, but I think I might be still around when this happens. Talking about that NIL money, name, image, likeness, that will be available to some players, many players through the NCAA, which would be on top of any scholarship money that they're getting. Do you think it's possible, if not likely, that in our lifetimes, and it might even happen sooner, a decade too soon, I don't know, but that we end up with a model in the Ontario Hockey League / Canadian Hockey League where players are being paid? All of a sudden, this becomes a semi-pro, if you will, league.
Yeah, I mean, obviously all options have to be on the table. And the big disadvantage the CHL has against the NCAA is just that NCAA sports in the States is massive business, massive business. And I don't believe the CHL is ever going to get to that level in Canada or States because there are American teams in the CHL. But the CHL will never get to that level of financial competitiveness with the NCAA. However, you can start to close the gap as best you can. And I think we've heard tell of these players unions starting up in the CHL and looking for a little bit better deal. These are all things that have to be considered. And I think that you'll see a bigger push for that going forward, Mike. Obviously, they have to make the deal as attractive as it possibly could be for these kids to make their decision, so that the CHL doesn't just become a feeder league of, your 16, 17, 18-year-old years, and then you move on somewhere else. They'll have to counter that in some way. And I think they'll do their best. I do think that you might see some level of pay or some level of agreement where if a player's maybe similar to name, image, likeness. If your player is used in a lot of the marketing and branding, there's some sort of compensation for that. I just don't see the financial competitiveness of the CHL ever getting that close to what the NCAA is. The money there is just insane.
Back to what you said earlier, and I just want to take a step further about the number of American players we're seeing on development camp rosters this month in the Ontario Hockey League. It seems to me, Dan, with the number of American players we're seeing on these rosters, as you said earlier, kind of testing the waters here in the Ontario Hockey League, I can't help but think this will lead to more than the usual number of these players being signed to free agent deals in the Ontario Hockey League.
100%, Mike, because the way the structure was currently set up, there was almost like a couple wilderness years for these players that were looking to go NCAA. And what do you do when you're 17? So, yeah, there were tier two leagues, there were junior B leagues, there were different prep schools. They'd find a landing spot, but the CHL is a better landing spot for sure. So these rules have loosened that up to the point where this is actually a great thing for the players, because if you were drafted as a flyer by, I mean, we saw the Pierre Repeats held their development camp this week and a couple of American players showed up on their radar, not necessarily going to sign them, but these players come up, dip their toe in the water, see the facilities, meet some billets, see what the coaching staff's like. They get a flavor for it without having to sacrifice their long-term future or sign their life away. And they might even say, you know what, I'll try this for a season or even part of a season. So the options have opened up, and well, that is a little bit nerve-wracking for teams to say, not only do we have to recruit these players and keep them engaged in our community, but it does open up that door to a handful of players coming every year that wouldn't have entertained it because they had to protect their NCAA interests. So I think inevitably, Mike, you're going to see each roster this year dotted with, somewhere between 1 and 4 or 5 kids that were not going to come to the CHL just for that reason.
Such an interesting time in our game, to say the very least. Okay, still lots more interesting content coming for you on this week's episode of the OHL podcast. We alluded earlier to the Kingston Frontenacs being a really nice story this season. There was a reason we did that. Some hardware going to the Limestone City. We'll get to that. Your performers of the week. And round 3 is done. We're headed into the OHL final, which looks an awful lot like last year's OHL final. Stay with us as we continue the OHL podcast. The NBA 82 game grind is done, and now the fun begins. The NBA playoffs are here, and it's time for all the high stakes drama, clutch moments, and jaw dropping plays. I can't wait. If you're looking to make the playoffs even more exciting, DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered as an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Try placing a bet on your favorite player's performance. Will they drop 30 points, 40, or more? It's your call. Here's something special, too, for first-timers. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Make it a playoff run to remember with DraftKings. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Well, Dan, we both went 2 for 2 in the Final Four. London, and I think you had London in 5. I had London in 6. And on the Eastern side, we both had Oshawa in 6, if I recall.
Correct.
Okay, so right team, wrong number of games in both counts, but here we go into the finals. We'll get to that more in just a moment, but let's start on the Eastern side. And I guess I learned my lesson. I said that coming into the series with Barry. I'm not underestimating the Ashawa Generals anymore because I picked them to lose in the first round, and then I picked them to lose again in the second round. But pretty dominant performance, sweeping away the Barrie Colts, including a Game 3 double overtime 7-6 win on home ice.
Yeah, the Ashawa Generals, I got to thank them. They're making me look good because I've pretty consistently from day one of this year stuck with them as the East winner. And there was blips along the way. They had a few coaching issues to sort out. There was different things going on this year that made people doubt a little. I don't think the Oshawa Generals ever did. I think they knew they were a good team, and then it really didn't matter who they matched up with in the playoffs because they were going to have to go through them all anyway. But yeah, the fire wagon hockey has kind of come out in this round, has it not? I mean, the Gens are lighting the lamp, and I think from a coaching standpoint, they're probably going to say, well, we're playing the best defensive hockey team probably in the CHL now, so we're going to have to tighten up because we might not get those 6, 7s, and 8 spots. We might have to keep a few pucks out of our net as well. Not that they're not doing that well. I think it'll just be a different brand of hockey than they've seen. And this is to say, not to slam the Barrie Colts in any way. What a terrific defensive hockey team all year and great goaltending. So the fact that you're putting up those numbers against the Barrie Colts is nothing to sneeze at. Suggests they might have some success against London, and they're going to want it because you referenced what happened last year, Mike, and the Gens want this one. So I think we're about to see a pretty entertaining series.
I'm curious if the Barrie Colts remain a force in the Eastern Conference next year. If you go back to the beginning of the season, Dan, and we talked about the balance of power being in the Eastern Conference, and we immediately, of course, identified Oshawa. Brantford was kind of in the mix. Brampton, which tough story for their first year back in that part of the GTA as the Brampton Steelheads. It just didn't work out. And we had the Barrie Colts in that mix beginning of the season. And I wasn't sure about Barrie even coming into these playoffs. Obviously, they showed not only do they have terrific goaltending, but they've got talent up and down the roster. They played very strong defensively under Marty Williamson. I'm just not sure what the tea leaves hold for this Colts team, depending on graduations and whether or not they want to try to load up for another run, or they might sell off and look ahead to the next couple of years.
Yeah, it's you look at these pending graduations, and our previous topic talks about all the uncertainty about who may or may not come back. My gut tells me the Barrie Colts are going to get stung by some key losses. I mean, we saw them pick up Van Steensel and Romani from Barrie, and they're Bo Jelsma and some of these players who will likely be graduating. We're not sure on a couple other fronts. You might have some players that stick longer with NHL teams. That should be solid in net. We saw Ben Rebick had a great year. Of course, Hillebrand had to come in the playoffs because that's a pretty solid combo you have. You go with the hot hand, so they should be okay in goal. Probably going to get there's some of their high end guys like Aitchison back and whatnot, but for me, Mike, they're trending towards kind of mid pack next year. I think there will be a bit of a step back, but it's hard to say because a lot of the top teams are suffering huge graduations, as we're going to see in Oshawa and Kingston as well. So you never know. This is where the coaching factor comes in heavily, I believe.
Yeah, no question that the Ashawa Generals are built for this year. The whole goal was to get back to where they are, and that is the OHL final. And obviously, they want a different result. In order to obtain that different result, they're going to have to beat a team that is an absolute wagon in these Ontario Hockey League playoffs. Yet to lose a game are the London Knights. So I'll just take a moment to remind you that this Knights team has now equaled the 2019 Ottawa 67s, who swept Hamilton, Sudbury, and then Oshawa on their way to an OHL final against the Guelph Storm. And that Ottawa team in 2019 then won the next two games, the first two games of the OHL final over Guelph, for a 14-0 mark to start the playoffs. Incredible stuff. That's the best the OHL has seen. So obviously the Knights 2 wins away from tying and 3 from establishing a new mark to start the OHL playoffs. Best playoff record, to the best of my knowledge, 16-2 over the 4 rounds of OHL playoffs. There was, I think it was a Windsor team, forgive me, back in the 80s, that went 12-0 through the playoffs, but that was back in the weird days when you could get a second round bye. You win your first round, you take a bye, and then you win your next 2 rounds. And that team, I believe it was Windsor. Anyway, it was 12-0. That's all background information to get ready for this London team, Dan, that, again, an absolute wagon, and top to bottom, they have myriad ways to hurt you like physically and or figuratively and literally. I'm done.
Oh, for sure. It's funny. I was talking to some London fans this week, and they actually were a little concerned that this team might not be the biggest team, physically daunting team, but that tells you what they've dealt with in the past because there's still plenty of size and speed on that roster. The speed in particular stands out because all five players on the ice can get to their spots at any times. There's a trust factor that comes in executing your systems. So, what a wagon that team is. You're absolutely right. They're top to bottom. What I'm looking forward to in this series, though, Mike, is we look at London's path. I mean, they overmatched the Owen Sound attack. We all saw that coming. They ran into the Erie Otters, who were kind of a strong offensive team, had a lot up front, maybe a little vulnerable on the back end. Then they ran into Kitchener, who was extremely strong defensively and in goal, maybe a little light on offense, especially missing Christian Humphreys and Adrian Misljevic. So running into Oshawa will be the first time, I think, this playoffs that London's facing a team that is pretty solid all the way through the lineup. So the game plan is going to have to be a little different. Oshawa's a little more physical as well. So this will be the challenge of the challenges, but it just seems with that London team that it doesn't matter who you've got on the ice, wave after wave, they do their job. And, Denver Barkey's health status, we're not sure. Saw him wearing an air cast at the end of that Ranger series, so he might miss a bit or not be at 100%. And that's a big loss for London. But it feels like they can just inject the next line over. You suddenly have Noah Reed coming over the boards. It doesn't matter. They have kids that know how to play the system and play hard game in, game out, take sticks. They just do it the right way. So I'm looking forward to a really, really good series, but I think this will be their toughest test. I mean, not that I'm going out on a huge limb there in the OHL finals, but Oshawa team is deep as well.
I get to host a post-game show for fan call-ins after every Ranger game, home game, right through the playoffs as well. And got what I thought was the perfect question on every Kitchener Rangers fan's mind during that series with the London Knights. Now, remember, the bias comes out here because I'm based in Kitchener. I call their games, and fans see an awful lot of the London Knights, and they see the London Knights for more than a decade now having dominated the Kitchener Rangers. 8 playoff series between the two teams. London wins 6, the Rangers win 2. Regular season, the numbers are not even close. It's remarkable the level of dominance that London has asserted over the Kitchener Rangers. So the fans' question on that post-game call-in show was, how do you beat a team like the London Knights? And I just kind of laughed. And the funny thing about it, not really funny, haha, for any team's fan base like Kitchener's that just keeps seeing the same thing over and over again, get to a playoff series against London, come out on the wrong end of it. But what I say is funny about this is it's just been the same formula year after year after year. So, I mean, maybe it's just, but isn't it the old saying, if you can't beat them, join them? So has nobody really tried to apply the same principles to their team that London has been applying to theirs for 25 years? Or can nobody do it as well as the London Knights are doing it?
It's a very nuanced question, obviously, Mike, because there's a mental component that comes in when you've exerted that dominance. Obviously, the team like Kitchener, you see in some of the games, it's almost like they were defeated to start the game, and so there's a mental component there. But yeah, when you look at London, obviously, and let's just say call it like it is, they have some recruiting advantages as well. So they have those 2 or 3 extra bodies that are there that other teams might not have access to. That obviously helps. But when you look at what London does really well in developing the players from table, they have a certain type of player, an aggressive, fast, physical type of player, where if they're undersized or smaller, they can still do those other things. They can still skate. They're still aggressive. And where it really exposes other teams is on those pockets of the teams that don't have that ability to push back. And I think we saw it with Kitchener, and I'll spare you some names, but Kitchener for sure. We've criticized them. I've criticized them for a few years. They don't have enough size. Started to rectify that a little bit this year and get some bigger bodies. But the problem is those bodies have to be able to skate too. And I think when you play London, you always see those 2 or 3 players that were effective all year that just can't skate with the London Knights and are rendered fairly ineffective. So once you start get those little pockets in your lineup that can't compete, they get exposed. So for me, the formula, Mike, you talk about the physical, aggressive, in your face, annoying, all those tactics that London applies, that why doesn't these other teams do it? For me, the number one tactic is just having that whole lineup ability to play that game and that team approach where they can all do it. They're all aggressive. There's not too many nice guys out there They can all skate. So I think it's a tough thing to match because you can't have those pockets in your lineup. But London manages to do it, and they manage to take kids who don't look like it in September and October, but by January they're all kind of on the same page. So there's a process there that's working as well that I think makes that answer a little more nuanced than some people think. Where it's just go draft big annoying kids that are tough to play against. It's more than just that.
It's not often that I get stumped on the post-game call-in show because frankly, I'll just make up some crap because it's a post-game call-in show. But this one really did give me pause, and I asked around a little bit more to get some insight from other people around the rinks because again, I think it's a really interesting question. To put into perspective how it's gone for the London Knights, they won their first OHL championship in 2005, just a few years after Dale and Mark took over the team. And since then, starting with 2005 being the baseline here, 19 seasons, 19 OHL championships have been played, including including the one this year that's about to be played. 2 years missing there, of course, because of COVID cancellations. And so this will be the eighth appearance in those 19 years in the OHL final for the London Knights. In their first seven, they're 5-2. The only losses in 06 and then in 2022 to the Peterborough Petes. So just let that sink in for a moment. That was 23 for the Petes, wasn't it? Either way, both losses to the Petes, but 8 times in the past 19 OHL finals, you have seen the London Knights there. Incredible. And the consistent response I got when asking around the league about this, 2 answers came back. One is nobody works harder than London Knights general manager Mark Hunter, which I find interesting. No, I'm not disputing that for 1 second. There's a work ethic built into the Hunters that is incredibly well known, but lots of people can work hard. So is Mark Hunter working smarter as well as harder? I don't know. Does he have a better eye for identifying those kinds of players, Dan, that you just talked about so eloquently a moment ago? Maybe so. But that came back as a consistent answer. Nobody works harder than Mark Hunter. And the other consistent answer is Dale Hunter might be underrated as a coach. And I say that only because I know he's won the coach of the year before and he's shown his stuff in the National Hockey League and obviously year over year over year with successful London Knights teams. That doesn't happen by accident, but maybe people think, well, you've got a roster like that. Obviously, you're going to put up a lot of wins, but Dale finds a way to maximize what he's getting from that roster. And I think Sam Dickinson's comments following the elimination of the Kitchener Rangers were really telling. He says, when you come to London and play for Dale, you're going to play defense. And if you can't when you come in, you're going to figure out how, because that's the way it goes. And you and I have talked about this, Dan, on multiple occasions through our time together on this podcast. I don't care if your name's Mitch Marner. I don't care if your name's Corey Perry. I don't care if your name's Max Domi. I don't care if your name's Easton Cowan. You want to play for the London Knights? You're going to learn to play defense. And so maybe those are the 2 secret ingredients here, Mark and Dale Hunter.
Well, I think that's absolutely fair to say, and I know everyone loves to hate on the Hunters around the league for a variety of reasons, but you're absolutely right in what they get out of that team, and there is an ability to communicate a message, the right message, and get them to execute that they consistently do that not every team can. And I'll look at a couple micro examples, Mike, that outline that, because you're absolutely right. Defense wins, but it's not just being the strongest player. It's that commitment to the work ethic and understanding where you need to be on the ice. And I started to do this during the London series where I said I would count the number of times an opposing player's stick was available in the slot in front of the London net. And I swear it never got more than I could count on one hand. It was 3 to 4 times a game at most, and it was for a split second. Every stick anywhere near the house gets taken out by London players. And you start to do that with the other teams, and there's slippage. It's junior hockey. You see it, 6-7 times a period. You see it a lot, and it's just that awareness, that wherewithal, that accountability to each other that becomes a cultural thing in London, where these are the non-negotiables. You got to execute them all the time, or someone else will. And I look at, just turning to the NHL really briefly, the Edmonton Oilers just had this comeback against the LA Kings, and I saw a breakdown of what happened. And there were several goals in that series early on where players like Leon Draisaitl didn't quite commit to the back check, got burned. And then later in the series, you saw it on the other side. Some some goals where a player of the ilk of Adrian Kempe, who was -8 in that series, high end player, but just didn't skate that extra stride at top speed to take that stick going to the net, the high guy, and they scored. And you look, that's at the NHL level, Mike, where just these little small details in terms of effort and being in the right spot and committing, I'm going to expend my energy to snuff this play rather than try and score on the other end. And in junior hockey, you get that a bit with teams where I'm more concerned about scoring a goal and saving my energy for that. So I'm just going to let up for a second. And, that's where that stick gets open. And how many goals did we see London tip home or get to the front of the net for a quick rebound because they outworked their player to the front of the net? And that's happening in reverse at the other end, where the London player is just outworking that forward just enough to make sure that stick isn't available. So to me, the biggest factor it comes down to is awareness and work ethic. Those things are number one, and London almost never gets out competed in terms of effort and awareness. And I mean, it's a simple recipe when you break it down, Mike, but that's what I see.
So, have we just spent the last several minutes describing how it's going to be impossible for the Oshawa Generals to win the OHL championship? I'm curious. I don't know. Like, how do you build the case, Dan, that the Oshawa Generals find a way to defeat this juggernaut from London?
Well, I think the great equalizer that can close that gap a little is skill, and Oshawa has a ton of it. Like when you're going against Danford and Sandu and Gibson and these players on the back end, yeah, it might be harder for you to find those available sticks. Work ethic you might have to muscle them out because they're already there. And then on forward, when you've got the Colby Barlows, the Becca Senecas, and we've seen how some of these players on Oshawa have really stepped up their game. So Owen Griffin's another one that's just flying. So there's an extra level of skill there when, if you leave a stick open in the slot for a split second and it's a third liner on the Owen Sound attack, maybe they don't burn you. When you leave that stick open for a split second on some of these Oshawa General players, it's in the back of your net. So I think it just challenges a bit more each series for London, and that commitment to defense and work ethic gets challenged that much more. So I'm definitely not saying it's impossible for Oshawa, but when you have the whole team rowing the way London always does, I mean, the odds are in their favor.
Okay, it's time to put our money then where our mouths are. And I didn't get to see any of the Barry Oshawa series because it overlapped with the series that I was covering. I did get to see a little bit of the Brantford Oshawa series. And one of the things that jumped out to me was Colby Barlow, who I mean, here's a guy that was obviously it was a tough start to the season, wanted out of Owen Sound, gets the trade that he wanted. There he is, but it took him some time. I remember talking about that earlier this season. Like, where's Colby Barlow? Where are the numbers? What I saw, albeit in limited viewings, but was a bit of a snarl in this guy's game, which is good. That makes Colby Barlow a very dangerous player, as if he wasn't already. And you already talked about the offense that Oshawa can throw at you with the likes of Seneca, Callum Ritchie. It just goes on from there. Who are you taking in this series, Dan?
Well, this is the first time all year that I haven't gone with the Generals, and it's just because of what we talked about with London. I just think they're so good. I've got London in 6 in this one, Mike, and it's no disrespect to Oshawa. They have some of those high end finishers that might give London more trouble, but until I see evidence that there's breakdown in London's game, I've got to roll with them. So I got London in 6, Mike.
I've been burned too many times. What am I supposed to do? I picked against Oshawa in round one. I picked against Oshawa in round two. I picked you, Jenny's, in the third round versus Barry, although you got it done in fewer games than I thought you would. So, how do I possibly go against Oshawa in the OHL final? It's a rematch from last year, and it's a record setting rematch. The London Knights, the only team to win back to back to back Wayne Gretzky trophies in the West. The Oshawa Generals, the only team to win back-to-back Bobby Orr trophies in the East. How do I pick against you, Oshawa? Because you're playing London. I'm taking. I'm sorry. That's the only answer I got for you, Schwa. I'm taking the Knights in 7. I'll give you 7 games, Oshawa, because you've impressed me and you've made me look like a fool throughout these entire playoffs. But I've seen way too much of London to find any real flaw in the game. So best of luck. I think, Dan, though, we are being set up here for a whale of a final.
It absolutely should be. And I actually kind of like the dynamic of this series where you have all that high end, like almost surefire NHL talent on Oshawa's side. looking for revenge, just rolling through the East against a team that we just identified, Mike, just really doesn't make many mistakes. They're so tight. They're so hard to pick apart through a game to win a game. Almost as close to flawless hockey as you'll see in junior hockey. So it should be a great one. You're right. How do you pick against either one of them? But until I see evidence London's willing to to relinquish some ice, I think it's got to be them.
Okay, the latest OHL trophy flies to the coop, and our performers of the week are still to come on this week's episode of the OHL podcast. Just a little more housekeeping as we wrap up for another week here on the OHL podcast. And Dan, let's start with the Jim Gregory Trophy for the OHL's General Manager of the Year. Got to Game 7 in round 2, but you cannot deny the boldness of the moves at the trade deadline. And it's Kingston's Corey Cooper, a.k.a. Coop, who wins the trophy this year as GM of the Year.
Yeah, congratulations to Corey on that. Like, there are so many execs in this league who are deserving of the honor, and everyone's going to pick apart every time a trophy is named. Oh, well, what about this or that? And where you look at the criticisms of Corey Cooper and Kingston, say, well, this team still got ousted in the second round. Fair, but I think you look at what you want from your GM. First of all, huge credit to him for luring Troy Mann, solidifying that coaching staff. That's a big piece of the GM's job, is to figure out who the hockey operations staff is, and he did a great job there. Identifying the age composition of his roster and figuring out what components, when it was a go for it year this year, what components to bring in. And I think a lot of people wrote Kingston off just based on their history and the fact that there were some other heavyweights in the division this year. So what does he do? He brings in some key complementary pieces, I would say. I wouldn't say he blew all his assets on a major acquisition. He just kind of tinkered around the edges to solidify that roster. And don't kid yourself. Yeah, they got eliminated in the second round, but they were right there, Mike. It could have gone either way. It was right down to the wire in Game 7. Couple bounces, couple breaks, and they were there. So I think all in all, it's hard to argue with the results Corey Cooper's squad got this year. Just as consistent as anyone in the East, Mike. I heard nothing but positives from Kingston fans this year in the postmortems, that it was a really entertaining year. It was fun to watch. All in all, I think Corey was a very deserving winner, and it was nice to see him inject some enthusiasm back in that fan base.
I'm glad you talked about the Game 7 and how really it was that close to going either way. Barrie ends up winning it. Because when you think of, okay, the team basically won one round. I mean, that's what the numbers will tell you. Got to Game 7 in the second round, but still knocked out were the Kingston Frontenacs. But you're right. Game 7s are like a coin flip. It was that little margin of difference that could have sent Kingston into a third round versus Oshawa. I really like what Corey Cooper did. I like how bold he was. Don't forget, 19 draft picks is what he traded away to build the team that he hoped would go further than it did in the playoffs. But when you're the general manager and you've accumulated those assets, when it comes time to spend them, I think he spent them in very shrewd ways. It was a 16-game home winning streak for the Kingston Frontenacs at Slush Puppy Place this year. That's not an easy thing to do. So that speaks to the kind of team that Corey Cooper helped to assemble. And as you pointed out, Dan, that Troy Mann was coaching. That did a great job there as well. One of the numbers that stood out to me, though, was Kingston achieving its 5th 40-win season. This city, like I want it for Kingston, Dan. I really do. And you talked about the fans and the postmortems and, talking about what an entertaining year it was. I've said it too many times. I'll just say it and move on again. But ding dang it, why don't people go watch these games? It's a great arena in, I think, a great city, and they've put an entertaining product on the ice. I wish more people would go and watch them. But for such a proud, long-standing franchise, my goodness gracious, going back to the Kingston Canadians, the Raiders, etc., only 5 40-win seasons in the franchise history. Oy, oy, oy. That just speaks to, I guess, how tough it's been up there.
Yeah, it's a good question, Mike, why they don't get a little more support. And I think years of not quite getting over the hump in terms of championships will impact. There was a lot of disappointing years there. I kind of called them Sarnia East in terms of having some really good teams and not quite ever getting over those humps in the playoffs.
Sure.
That beats you down as a fan base. And I think, there's a brand of hockey issue as well in terms of that exciting style that teams or fans want to see. But you're right; it's a great facility, a great fan base. So just, I mean, it kind of warms my heart as an OHL fan who's spent a lot of time in Kingston, just seeing that energy, enthusiasm come back. And when you get the right people in place, Mike, you have to worry a little bit less about the cycles of junior hockey. Here's who we're losing next year. We're going to be terrible. With the right people in place, you can be competitive pretty much every year, as we've seen with a few of those teams in the West. So I hope good things ahead for Kingston, but I'm confident the right people are in place.
Coop is going to have to put that GM of the Year trophy to work next season when, again, now with all those draft picks spent this year, how do you restock the cupboard? How do you remain competitive so that the cycle doesn't beat you down too much? We think the coaching staff is in place to do that. But congratulations to Corey Cooper and the OHL General Manager of the Year award. One more thing for us to take care of, and that is our performers of the week. We'll start with you, Dansky. Who you got?
All right. Well, apologies if I took the same guy, Mike, but I had to go with another Jenny this week just on the output they got in this series. But how about Luca Morelli quietly running that show from the back end? I mean, so when Barry get to the conference finals, what does he do? Shut out in game one. So I'm not really happy with that, right? So I'm going to do run up 11 points over the next 3 games. 2 goals, 9 assists for that kid. Just quietly running the show there, understanding what he's got up front, understanding what he's got on the power play, getting pucks through lanes, which is a massively underrated skill for a point man, especially in power plays. Just all year, he's been there for that team, quietly being one of the elite offensive defenders in the league, if not the elite one, and leading the league in scoring right now. So my guy this week, Mike, Luca Morelli.
Ditto. Like, come on, Dan. So earlier through these playoffs, given times of recording and one time a brain fart on my part, we didn't get our predictions in at the beginning of a series. So we asked our loyal listeners, hey, work with us here on the honor system. These were the picks that we made. So just to reinforce the honesty, Dan and I do not discuss ahead of time, because if we did, we would not on back-to-back weeks have the same performer of the week. But we do, for all of the reasons that Dan just mentioned. He made himself almost impossible to overlook in that Barry series, including the 5 points he had in the series clinching finale. So look, you know what? Here's what I'll just add to it. Morelli and Dickinson on the ice. Dickinson, obviously, with London, and Morelli with Oshawa. Just 2 of the great players we're going to be able to watch through, hopefully, a long OHL final.
Yeah, and Mike, as the playoffs shrink and there's fewer and fewer teams, the pool for performers of the week shrinks as well. So it stands to reason we might overlap. So I'll tell you what, next week I'm going to have a 1A and 1B, and I'll let you go first. How's that?
It's a deal. It's a deal, Dan Mahar. All right. That man over there is Dan Mahar. Find him on X at his name, Dan Mahar. I'm at Farwell_OHL. Find us on YouTube at the OHL Podcast, Instagram, the OHL Podcast. Please send an email anytime to ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Something we said that you thought was incredibly stupid, let us know. Or you want to tell us how smart we are. Okay, tell Dan how smart he is. That right? When's the last time you heard that, Dansky? You're smart.
I don't hear it around home a whole lot, so
The email is ohlpodcast@rogers.com. And another reminder, last year's winner took home more than $50,000. At the time of recording, the jackpot is more than $25,000. So your share, $12,500. It's only going to go up from there. I'm talking about the Farwell for Hire 50/50 draw. If you're in Ontario, or you know somebody in Ontario to buy the ticket for you, cf5050.ca. You'd help me raise money for a charity that means a lot to me, and you could win some big bucks. So check out cf5050.ca. Buy yourself a 50/50 raffle ticket. And Dan and I will be back next week right here on the OHL Podcast.